Have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
10 years under the banner of Operation Cyclone, the United States gave weapons and training to Islamic rebel groups as they fought to overthrow the Soviet Union-backed Afghanistan government. Trained by the CIA, the Afghan Mujahideen rose to become a global jihadist threat whose legacy still impacts the Middle East to this day. Some experts even believe that this mission led to the attacks on the World Trade Center on September the 11th, 2001. Today,
I debated, or I thought I was going to debate an Afghani professor at the World Affairs Conference in Boulder last year, because he was paid working for the VOA and U.S. propaganda arm, so I presumed he was bought and paid for. And he kept telling me, just let me finish my sentence, so to speak. And I did, and what he said is what the powers have done is condemned Afghanistan to eternal violence and conflict.
Yes, it looks like it's going to be horrible.
They're pulling out, and this side is not going to agree to relent, and the Soviets are going to see what they would call a necessity to keep arming the other side. This is where you get into a test, if you will, of Gorbachev's sincerity and Bush's, kinder, gentler, goodness in the nation. Do they really mean it? They're trying to convince the world that the Cold War is winding down. Doonesbury's already told us the Cold War is over. It isn't. Now the danger, of course, is that people are so eager, craving for hope and craving for peace. It doesn't take much. As dynamic as the peace movement arguably is in the United States and Europe, for example, it sure doesn't take much for a president to get up there and just 3 words, kinder, gentler, and then the goodness and greatness, 4 words. And people, oh wow,
Yeah. Whereas the actual policies are to keep violence and covert operations and secret wars going. So your point about the U.S. intervention in Afghanistan, rather than negotiating a peaceful settlement or negotiating some sort of a governmental structure, we just supported any forces whatsoever to create chaos in the region to humiliate the Soviet Union. That was the goal and continues to be the goal of the Bush administration, that continues to fund the Afghan rebels to make sure there's more murder, chaos, etc. there. What does Bush, how can he justify continuing to support the Afghan rebels now that the Soviet Union has pulled out? There's no longer a foreign oppressor there.
Well, this is just classic old Cold War, the elephants fighting, and the grass getting trampled. We haven't had our victory over there yet. I'm putting it in their terms, in Bush's terms, the CIA's terms. It is in the process of happening. It on the Contras and the Black Hats on the Sandinistas and the media, the Washington Post, the biggies cooperating. And they're clearly cooperating in Afghanistan. Otherwise, we would be having much more graphic footage and graphic explanations of what's happening in Afghanistan right now today, and it's going to get worse for the for the next year.
All they call them freedom fighters, and that's it.
But there's been nothing on U.S. support of any specific groups or what the effects of supporting these groups are.
See, this is exactly what I'm saying. This is the biggest one in the history of the CIA, and there's been nothing about it. And part of the reason is it's been a full bipartisan. The Contra program was public, and there was debate on it, and at times it was voted down. It were close votes.
There were serious differences.
In the Afghani, it's virtually unanimous. Both sides of the House and the Congress or the Senate are fully behind it, and so and the administration didn't want to provoke a debate on it, and the media was willing to go in and give us a glimpse now and then, but not map it out for us.
They give you mainly the glimpse of the Soviet atrocities, or it appears that it was the Soviet occupation that's creating all of the bloodshed, that this is a legitimate revolutionary or counter-revolutionary force. But they don't go into any detail of how the U.S. is supporting these groups. And there's also nothing about the drug running, of these different rebel drugs to say, and of course there's nothing about the CIA actually helping these rebel forces with their drug running to help support their military struggles against the Soviets.
Without mention of the CIA program and the secret war, you do pick up articles about, you know, the drug allocations around the world, and the Golden Crescent is now the largest source of heroin apparently in the world today, right in there where the CIA's been running this operation with its C-130s and C-123s, flying in with arms and flying out with the heroin.
What's the
situation working where we may not have that infusion of energy from the White House, from the Congress, giving us the ammunition for our debates and rallies and a rallying point for the Peace Corps. A little bit harder for us to be sure what's happening in given countries, the sort of thing where it may come out 5 years later, like Chad with Woodward's coverage coming out, you know, years later.
What was that about?
Well, back in the early 80s, Woodward's book, Veil, there was some coverage at the time, Time, Newsweek, but the CIA put 2 consecutive invasions, or forces together from the Sudan to move into Chad to take power, to counter Gaddafi and his forces coming down from Libya. At the time it was happening, you don't get the coverage, they keep it secret if they want to. The Afghani operation is the biggest one in the history of the CIA, and they managed to divert, biggest in every sense, including the fact the largest heroin smuggling ring left behind. And they managed to keep it from, not secret, but keep it from being a focal point of debate for the 6 major years that it was run.
How can you believe what you have been seeing on CNN today, ladies and gentlemen? Can you believe it? Supposedly, a CNN reporter found Osama bin Laden, took a television camera crew with him, went into Osama bin Laden's hideout, interviewed him and his top leadership, his top lieutenants and colonels and generals in their hideout. This is a CNN reporter with a camera crew. And he came out and told everybody, within 3 weeks, Osama bin Laden is going to attack the United States and Israel. Now, don't you think that's kind of strange, folks? You see, because the largest intelligence apparatus in the world, with the biggest budget in the history of the world, has been looking for Osama bin Laden for years and years and years, and can't find him. The FBI also, under the leadership of Louis Freeh, has been looking for Osama bin Laden for years and years and years and years and years and many years, and can't find him. Some doofus, jerk-off reporter with a camera crew waltzes right into his hideout and interviews him. And you know what his budget is? Zip, zilch, nothing. Now, that tells us 2 things. Either everyone in the intelligence community and all of the intelligence agencies of the United States government are blithering idiots and incompetent fools, including the entire apparatus of the FBI and all of their personnel, or they're lying to us. They're not looking for him at all. And the second is the truth. You see, the CIA created Osama bin Laden. They recruited him. They trained him. They found his leadership. They brought them all together. They showed them how to fight the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and when that was over, they still continued to fund him and train him, and they're now using him to help bring about world government by making him the big boogeyman, because they can't use Saddam Hussein anymore, because they needed a new boogeyman. A reporter from CNN and his little camera crew got in to Osama bin Laden's secret hideout and conducted an interview. If you don't believe me, tune into CNN. They're probably running it right now as I'm speaking. And if you believe it, you are one of the stupidest jerks that ever lived on the face of this earth.
The ugliest names of these days is Bin Laden. He's a cockroach that got up from where? I don't know from where he came. And he's sowing such distortion all over the world. 2,000 years ago, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai writes that there will be a man by the name Bin Laden. It's amazing. Not if you go into the Zohar HaKadosh. The Zohar HaKadosh was written 2,000 years ago. You don't believe me? Go to Bereshit, Zohar, Bereshit, Perek Vav, Daf Vav, page 6, and Bereshit. And you will see that there is going to be, at the end of times, there will be a man, a person. I mean not a man, he calls him a dog. Who was a dog in heaven, and he came down as a dog, and he took the shape of a human being, and his name is Bin Laden, and he is going to cause tumult all over the world. He will cause wars, and that is at the end of times, Acharit Hayamim. Now, go further to Parashat Vayera in the Zohar HaKadosh. You will find there an extraordinary information. There will be two big buildings in the land of Edom, which today we relate the word Edom to America. And those are the biggest, the tallest buildings in the world. And they will be brought down completely. And that will be the sign of the beginning of tremendous wars that will end only in the coming of the Mashiach. You know, I'll tell you something. 1 week before, one of the great rabbis in Israel, a Hasidic rabbi, an Admor, he came to visit Rebbe New Square. And he came with some people, some of his disciples in the car, and they were coming towards the evening. He didn't want to lose the time of Mincha, you know, the prayer of the afternoon. So he said, please, can you stop right here? I want to daven, I want to pray Mincha here. They prayed Mincha with Minyan in front of everybody passing in Manhattan. Where? Right there, near the World Center. After he finished the davening, the prayer, he said, say bye-bye to those buildings because you are not going to see them no more.
Gentleman in the pink shirt. You're going to see two big bold numbers. It says BB 18. Those are fuse holders. Now look at all three pictures and look at how many boxes of plastic fuse holders that can be used for remote control demolition. And ask yourself, why would art students from Israel and Austria be having thousands of fuse holders? This building was built in the early 1970s. They weren't electricians. They weren't redoing all of the electricity in that building. Some of those artists are guaranteed Mossad bomb experts, and that's in the DEA document that you can read.
It began when this woman was watching the Twin Towers burning from her apartment in New Jersey. She noticed three men on top of a van, posing for pictures with the towers burning in the background.
And I could see that they were like happy. You know, they didn't look shocked to me. You know, they didn't look shocked. I thought it was very strange.
The witness called police, who stopped the van hours later and arrested 5 men. All 5, it turns out, were Israeli. They were turned over to the FBI. Sources tell ABC News during a check of national security databases, some of the men were listed as having had connections with Israeli intelligence. At the FBI, that set off alarm bells. The FBI needed the answers to 3 important questions. Who were these men? What brought them to that parking lot on the morning of September 11th? And did they have any advance knowledge of what was going to happen that day? They said they worked for a company called Urban Moving. The FBI obtained a search warrant for the company's offices.
2 SUVs were filled up with between 9 and 12 boxes and computers.
Not long after the arrests, the offices of Urban Moving were simply abandoned. Almost everything was left behind. In jail, the 5 Israelis were repeatedly interrogated and given lie detector tests. Stephen Gordon was their American lawyer.
They were asked questions if they had ever been approached by or hired by any non-United States intelligence community.
While there is still some debate among American intelligence officials, many investigators believe some of the men were part of an Israeli operation aimed at monitoring radical Islamic charities that support groups like Hamas, something lawyers for the 5 men and the Israeli government strongly deny.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
There was a team of clearly intel-connected foreigners who were arrested after 9/11, as you well know, videotaping the terror attacks. This is, I'm almost verbatim quoting from the FBI assessment of this. And the FBI determined that they apparently had foreknowledge of the attacks. So why can't we know more about that?
I was home. The only reason I wasn't where I was. My wife, God bless her, had made an appointment for me at the doctor. And I remember dressing to go to the doctor. I'm finally saying to my wife, I said, sweetheart, I've got so much to do downtown. I got to cancel this. I've got to go downtown. And she said, you're not going to cancel this appointment. You're going through it.
He doesn't understand militant Islam. So I wrote a book in 1995, and I said that if the West doesn't wake up to the suicidal nature of militant Islam, the next thing you'll see is the militant Islam is bringing down the World Trade Center.
Nice prediction there, just a bit of psychic, was he, like it's got Israeli fingerprints all over it. And with any of that sort of stuff, you just got to say, Q bono, who benefits? And the only people who benefited from 9/11 is Israel, and even Benjamin Netanyahu said that as well. So the one thing we are benefiting from at the moment is the attack on the World Trade Center.
Netanyahu said, quote, we're benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq.
I mean, they do these false flag attacks all the time. How much evidence do people need?
And sinful for you to suggest, imply, or help other people come to the conclusion that the U.S. government killed 3,000 of its own citizens.
This was the result of something that was planned. It's not accidental that the first tower just happened to collapse and then the second tower just happened to collapse in exactly the same way. How they accomplished this, we don't know.
The building collapsed to dust. You don't find a desk. You don't find a chair. You don't find a telephone, a computer. The biggest piece of a telephone I found was half of the keypad, and it was about this big.
What happened to the concrete? The concrete was pulverized from river to river. There was dust powder 2-3 inches thick. The concrete was just pulverized.
In addition to those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
If they had detonated, they were planned to take down a building.
I heard a second explosion.
There was a heavy-duty explosion.
Then there was secondary explosions and then the subsequent collapses.
An explosion blew and it knocked everybody over.
To me, it sounded like an explosion.
It sounded like gunfire. Bang, 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 bang. And then all of a sudden, 3 big explosions.
We heard a big explosion coming down. And then the entire top of the building just blew up.
We saw some kind of explosion.
By the force of the explosions.
Big explosion. Blew it back into the 8th floor.
Then we get to the lobby. This is a big explosion.
A lobby looked as though a bomb had exploded there.
A huge explosion now raining debris.
It's been a huge explosion.
Huge explosion that we all heard and felt.
We just witnessed some kind of follow-up explosion. We heard a very loud explosion.
A secondary explosion at Tower 1 camp.
That is another bomb going off. He thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building.
Evidence was also apparently planted. The passport of one of the hijackers on Flight 11 was allegedly found in the rubble.
Goes through the fireball, through the side of the plane, and comes down to the ground unscathed. But something happened. For 6 months they reported they had this passport. Boy, we've got it, we've got the proof. And then the guy stood up and was alive.
Several of these 19 men are still alive. Pancake theory. according to which the fires, while not melting the steel, heated it up sufficiently to cause the floors weakened by the airplane strikes to break loose from the steel columns, and this started a chain reaction.
So you would expect then from that theory, which is the official theory, to see a whole stack of floors piled up on top of each other and then a spindle of core columns standing too.
The core of each of the twin towers consisted of 47 massive steel columns. If the floors had broken loose from them, these columns would have still been sticking up into the air 1,000 feet.
The plane did not cut all those core columns.
We designed the buildings to take the impact of the Boeing 707 hitting the building at any location.
The building probably could sustain multiple impacts of jetliners.
That the plane flew straight into the building?
Through him, right. Yeah.
So you're saying that the building was actually designed to cope with a hole like that and
right.
still
yeah.
survive?
Yeah, it was.
If you had dropped, say, a billiard ball from the top of the World Trade Center, 110 floors up there, it would have taken 8 to 10 seconds to hit the ground, encountering no resistance whatsoever.
The Twin Towers came down in nearly free fall speed. 200,000 tons of steel shatters and explodes outwards over 500 feet.
This means that floors shattered at an average rate of about 10 floors per second.
There is no scenario for a pancake effect of buildings falling that allows them to fall at the rate of free fall.
Now what can do that? What can move mass out of the way? Explosives. "47 huge steel columns going up the core, and they're interconnected. How do you get them to fail simultaneously so the core disappears?" It looks like those core columns were cut.
The way we do this is by cutting the beam at an angle.
I started looking at the molten metal. All three buildings, both towers in the rubble, in the basement areas, and Building 7, there's these pools of molten metal.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails, like you're in a foundry. Like lava.
A volcano. The molten steel was found 3, 4, and 5 weeks later, when the rubble was being removed. He said that molten steel was also found underneath World Trade Center 7.
So I'm looking through the official reports. What do they say about the molten metal? They say nothing. But wait a minute. This is important evidence. So where did that come from? Thermite is so hot that it'll just cut through steel, through structural steel, for example, like a knife through butter. The products are molten iron and aluminum oxide, which goes off primarily as a dust. You know those enormous dust clouds? You can imagine when you assemble these chemicals on a large scale. Molten metal pools under both towers after they collapsed, and Building 7. Now, Building 7 wasn't even hit by a jet.
Part of the problem is that most people simply don't know much about Building 7 due to the extraordinary secrecy surrounding this collapse.
And this was a 47-story skyscraper. This building fell at 5:25.
It was not hit by a plane. This building had fires on only 2 or 3 floors.
And it was brought down by what we know was a controlled demolition.
Demolitions, they look just like that. You know, a kink in the middle, and then that building just comes straight down, almost at free fall speed.
They first blow one of the central columns so the building falls in on itself. Building 7 had a classic crimp or wedge. Its central column was blown out first so it didn't structurally damage buildings just a few feet away from it.
office was on the B1 level. As I was talking to a supervisor at 8:46, and all of a sudden we hear, boom! An explosion so hard that pushed us upwards. And it came from the basement between the B2 level and the B3 level. And when I went to verbalize, we hear, boom! The impact of the plane on the top.
As I'm walking by the main freight corridor building, in the corridor, that's when I got blown. I mean, the impact of the explosion threw me to the floor, and that's when everything started happening. All of a sudden, a big impact happened again, and all the ceiling tile was falling down, the light fixtures were falling. You know, you got to go clear across the whole from 1 to 2 World Trade Center, and then all of a sudden, it happened all over again. Something else hit us to the floor. Right in the basement, you felt it. Walls were caving in, everything that was going on. I mean, I know of people that got killed in the basement. I know of people that got broken legs in the basement. People that got reconstructive surgery because the walls hit them in the...
It's a mind-bending anomaly. Not a single U.S. Air Force interceptor turns a wheel until it's too late. There are no jets at all.
What if they were so confused and had been so deliberately confused that they couldn't respond?
The reason that they didn't know where to go was because a number of conflicting and overlapping war game exercises were taking place. It involved the insertion of false radar blips onto radar screens in the Northeast Air Defense Sector.
Lieutenant Team U, we have a problem here. We have a hijacked aircraft headed towards New York. We need someone to scramble some F-16s or something up there to help us out.
Is this real world or exercise? Is this real world or exercise? There was another exercise, Vigilant Warrior, which was in fact, according to a NORAD source, a live fly hijack drill being conducted at the same time. With only 8 available fighter aircraft, and they have to be dispatched in pairs, they were dealing with as many as 22 possible hijacks on the day of 9/11, and they couldn't separate the war game exercises from the actual hijacks.
President, why are you and the Vice President insisting on appearing together before the 9/11 Commission?
Because the 9/11 Commission wants to ask us questions. That's why we're meeting, and I look forward to meeting with them and answering their questions.
Why you're appearing together rather than separately, which was their request?
Because it's a good chance for both of us to answer questions that the 9/11 Commission is looking forward to asking us, and I'm looking forward to answering them. Let's see.
Do you think they should be able to stand up and speak their own words?
They should go under oath.
They should be, yeah, in public.
Don't you think that the families deserve to have a transcript or to be able to see what you
Adam,
said?
you asked me that question yesterday. I got the same answer, yeah.
The final report was a unanimous report. That means that if there was a single commissioner who had any objection about anything, that fact would be dropped from the report.
We have found out that he not only served on the transition team of the Bush administration, that he was a person who wrote a draft memo for the setup of the Bush administration's National Security Council, that he was an individual who wrote the preemptive war strategy that was eventually used for the war in Iraq, that he is a close friend of Condoleezza Rice's. We want him to resign.
There is literally nothing in the 9/11 report that the Bush administration did not approve of.
We can understand, therefore, why the Commission, under Zelikow's leadership, would have ignored all the evidence that would point to the truth, that 9/11 was a false flag operation intended to authorize the doctrines and funds needed for a new level of imperial mobilization.
Armed with knives, armed with chemical, biological, nuclear weapons. Fanatics, terrorists, September 11th. September 11th, killers, September 11th, terrorists. Terrorists of Al-Qaeda, terrorists, nuclear weapons, terrorists. 9/11, terror, terrorist, evil. September 11th, September 11th. The terrorists, war and danger. September 11th, terrorism, global terrorism, terrorism, terrorists. Terrorists, 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 the terror. Terrorists, terrorists, terrorism. September 11th, global terrorism, terrorists. Terrorism. September 11th, world terrorism.
Terrorism, terrorism, terrorism. September 11th, global terrorism. September the 11th, terror. Weapons of mass destruction. September the 11th, terrorists. The evil terrorists, no.
Terrorism. The words are hypnotically repeated. Terrorism, terrorist, terrorist threat, and of course, believed to be linked to Al-Qaeda. But it's the so-called war on terrorism that's in our faces practically 24/7 as the inescapable focus of our existence.
One day, our grandchildren will look back on this time and ask, how was the war on terror won?
The entire U.S. ruling class, ruling elite, comes to see terrorism as the preferred means, indeed the only means, to provide social cohesion, to provide an enemy image for the society to keep it together. According to neocon theory from Carl Schmitt, you have to have an enemy image in order to have a society. A very dangerous thing, because now it means that the entire social order, the political parties, intellectual life, politics in general, all based on a monstrous myth. Monstrous myth.
It's black, it's iron. My wife thinks I'm alright. I called her and said I was leaving the building. I was fine, and bang! 3 of us, 2 broken windows. Oh, God!
Days after the September attacks, there were countless rumors about strange coincidences surrounding the events. One report about a group of Middle Eastern men spotted the morning of September 11th parked just across the river from New York City has not gone away. Investigation of their presence has led to questions about whether Israel was conducting espionage on U.S. soil. We're joined now by ABC's John Miller with an exclusive report this evening.
That's right, Elizabeth. This is a case that took the FBI and the CIA more than 2 months to sort out, while 5 Israelis waited in jail. It began when this woman was watching the Twin Towers burning from her apartment in New Jersey. She noticed 3 men on top of a van, posing for pictures with the towers burning in the background.
And I could see that they were like happy. You know, they didn't look shocked to me. You know, they didn't look shocked. I thought it was very strange.
The witness called police, who stopped the van hours later and arrested 5 men. All 5, it turns out, were Israeli. They were turned over to the FBI. Sources tell ABC News during a check of national security databases, some of the men were listed as having had connections with Israeli intelligence. At the FBI, that set off alarm bells. The FBI needed the answers to 3 important questions. Who were these men? What brought them to that parking lot on the morning of September 11th? And did they have any advance knowledge of what was going to happen that day? The men said they were just taking pictures at the time. They said they worked for a company called Urban Moving. The FBI obtained a search warrant for the company's offices. Not long after the arrests, the offices of Urban Moving were simply abandoned. Almost everything was left behind. In jail, the 5 Israelis were repeatedly interrogated and given lie detector tests. Stephen Gordon was their American lawyer.
They were asked questions if they had ever been approached by or hired by any non-United States intelligence community.
While there is still some debate among American intelligence officials, many investigators believe some of the men were part of an Israeli operation aimed at monitoring radical Islamic charities that support groups like Hamas, something lawyers for the 5 men and the Israeli government strongly deny.
These 5 Israelis were not involved in any intelligence operation in the United States. The story is simply false.
According to federal officials, the 5 men have been barred from returning to the United States for 10 years, they say because they violated immigration laws.
Bottom line, John, is there any evidence any of these 5 men knew about the September 11th attacks before they occurred?
There was a group of Israelis, some of whom later were revealed as Mossad assets,
who were arrested after cheering and high-fiving and videotaping the crash of the airplanes into the World Trade Towers.
Several other men were detained after a van full of explosives was stopped outside of Manhattan.
Earlier, we had heard that an FBI spokesperson said that there was a report on the George Washington Bridge, which is another facility which you folks are responsible for policing, a report that there had been a van stopped there that had explosives.
Asked this week about another sprawling investigation and the detention of 60 Israelis since September 11th, the Bush administration treated the questions like hot potatoes.
I would just refer you to the Department of Justice with it. I'm not familiar with the report.
I'm aware that some Israeli citizens have been detained. With respect to why they are being detained and the other aspects of your question, whether it's because they are in intelligence services or what they were doing, I will defer to the Department of Justice and the FBI to answer that.
A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States. Investigators suspect that the Israelis may have gathered intelligence about the attacks in advance and not shared it. A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins, but when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 911 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information.
Now, when the FBI investigated, it quickly unraveled to be the largest foreign spy ring ever uncovered inside the United States, the largest. Even the Soviet Union had not been spying on the United States as much as Israel has been doing. So the FBI started to round up these spies. They started to arrest them very quietly, and they were about halfway through this process of rounding up this spy ring when 9/11 happened.
Numerous classified documents obtained by Fox News indicate that even prior to September 11th, as many as 140 other Israelis had been detained or arrested in a secretive and sprawling investigation into suspected espionage by Israelis in the United States. Investigators from numerous government agencies are part of a working group that's been compiling evidence since the mid-90s. These documents detail hundreds of incidents in cities and towns across the country that investigators say, quote, may well be an organized intelligence gathering activity. The first part of the investigation focuses on Israelis who say they are art students from the University of Jerusalem and Bezalel Academy. Documents say they, quote, targeted and penetrated military bases, the DEA, FBI, and dozens of other government facilities, and even secret offices and unlisted private homes of law enforcement and intelligence personnel. The majority of those questioned, quote, stated they served in military intelligence, electronic surveillance intercept, and or explosive ordnance units. Why would Israelis spy in and on the U.S.? A General Accounting Office investigation referred to Israel as Country A and said, quote, according to a U.S. intelligence agency, the government of Country A conducts the most aggressive espionage operation against the U.S. of any U.S. ally. The document concludes, quote, Israel possesses the resources and technical capability to achieve its collection objectives.
What about this question of advanced knowledge of what was going to happen on 9/11? How clear are investigators that some Israeli agents may have known something?
Well, it's very explosive information, obviously, and there's a great deal of evidence that they say they have collected, none of it necessarily conclusive. It's more when they put it all together. A bigger question, they say, is how could they not have known? Almost a direct quote, Brett.
It is now apparent that this intelligence ring was inside the U.S., had prior knowledge of 9/11, and had a classified role in 9/11, which officials refused to discuss. It was also able to penetrate U.S. intelligence agencies and secret offices. Despite all of this, all the Israelis were let go, without any espionage charges being filed.
The story is simply false.
Where were you on September 11th? I was home. And the only reason I wasn't where I was every morning, subsequent to the 26th day of July, my mornings were spent usually at a breakfast meeting at Windows, an 8 o'clock breakfast meeting, Windows, the top of it, right? And then going down to visit with my tenants, my new tenants, at the Trade Center, getting to know them, understanding their problems and so forth, ascertaining how we could service their needs better, which is one of the first things you do when you acquire a property. You begin to meet your tenants and start talking with them. And so my mornings were spent at the Trade Center, and then by noon I was back uptown. And so that particular morning, because I have light-colored hair and fair skin, and I'm an annuity to the dermatologist, my wife, God bless her, had made an appointment for me at the doctor. And I remember dressing to go to the doctor. I'm finally saying to my wife, I said, sweetheart, I've got so much to do downtown. I got to cancel this. I've got to go downtown. And she said, you're not going to cancel this appointment. You're going to the dermatologist. And, having been married now to the same woman for 46 years, you get this sense of determination on occasion, their voices. And I said, okay, yes, dear, I'll go. And then just minutes later, received a telephone call to turn on a television set and witnessed this horrendous circumstance. The first plane hitting, and then the second plane hitting. Of course, with the second hit, it became obvious that this was terrorism.
And so, next thing you know, we've got the designs of a building. And the first design meeting was in April of 2000. And construction began shortly thereafter in 2002. But we ran into a problem. We couldn't collect the insurance because the insurance companies didn't want to pay. There were 22 insurance companies defending 22 insurers who didn't want to pay their obligations under the policies. And so they took me to court. And I had to beat them in court, the lower court, and then had to take an appeal and win in the upper court. So they owed me $4.5 billion. A new governor was just elected, Elliot Spitzer, an old friend who I knew well. And I said, Elliot, if you don't help me, I'll never collect from the insurance companies. And guess what? He listened, and he said, you know what? You're entitled. I'm going to get you the money. And in 6 months, he got me the $4.5 billion. The insurance companies didn't like me, but at least I got the money.
Is an ordained rabbi and reportedly holds Israeli citizenship. Zakheim attended Jews College in London and became an ordained Orthodox Jewish rabbi in 1973. He was adjunct professor at New York's Jewish Yeshiva University. Zakheim is close to the Israeli lobby. Dov Zakheim is also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, or CFR, and in 2000 a co-author of the project for the New American Century's position paper titled Rebuilding America's Defenses, advocating the necessity for a Pearl Harbor-like incident to mobilize the country into war with Israel's enemies, mostly Middle Eastern Muslim nations. He was appointed by Bush as Pentagon Comptroller from 4th May 2001 to 10th March 2004. At that time, he was unable to explain the disappearance of $1 trillion. Actually, nearly 3 years earlier, Donald Rumsfeld announced on 10th September 2001 that an audit discovered $2.3 trillion was also missing from the Pentagon books. That story, as mentioned, was buried under 9/11's rubble. The two sums disappeared under Zakheim's watch. Despite these suspicions, on 6th May 2004, Zakheim took a lucrative position at Bose Allen Hamilton, one of the most prestigious strategy consulting firms in the world. One of its clients then was Blessed Relief, a charity said to be a front for Osama bin Laden. Bose Allen and Hamilton then also worked closely with DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is the research arm of the Department of Defense. Intelligence concerning Dov tells us that he is a dual Israeli-American citizen and has been tracking the halls of the U.S. government for 25 years, casting defense policy and influence on Presidents Reagan, Clinton, Bush Sr., and Bush Jr. Further intelligence points out that most of Israel's army armaments were gotten thanks to him. Squads of U.S. F-16s and F-15s were classified as military surplus and sold to Israel at a fraction of their value. Dov Zakheim's SPC Corporation provided the flight termination system and command transmitter system. Some people have posited that the planes that flew into the towers were remote controlled. Although sounding like science fiction to the average person, this technology has existed for several decades. In an emergency situation in which pilot and co-pilot have been incapacitated, ground control can take control of a plane and fly it safe and sound to its destination. The argument for the use of this technology would be to say that to ensure that the planes met their targets, instead of relying on some supposed suicide hijackers who might bail out at the last minute, remote control technology was used. We are not here to argue for this point, nor disagree with it, but it is more than telling that System Planning Corporation, or SPC, designs, manufactures, and distributes highly sophisticated technology that enables an operator to fly by remote control as many as 8 different airborne vehicles at the same time from one position either on the ground or airborne. System Planning Corporation markets the technology to take over the controls of an airborne vehicle already in flight. For example, the flight termination system technology could hijack hijackers and bring the plane down safely. The flight termination system can be used in conjunction with the CTS technology that can control up to 8 airborne vehicles simultaneously. The possibility of nefarious use of these brilliant technologies developed and deployed by Systems Planning Corporation certainly deserves careful consideration in any full and impartial investigation of what actually took place on 9/11. In the context of 9/11, it also needs to be pointed out that Rabbi Dov Zakheim was Chief Executive Officer of System Planning Corporation's International Division until President George W. Bush appointed him Undersecretary of Defense and Comptroller of the Pentagon. Not long before Rabbi Zakheim rose to power over the Pentagon's labyrinthine, bottomless accounts, he co-authored an article entitled Rebuilding America's Defenses, Strategy, Forces, and Resources for a New Century, which was published by the Project for a New American Century in September 2000, exactly a year before 9/11. In this article, on page 51, it is stated that, quote, "The process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor," unquote.
Dov Zakheim was a member of the Project for the New American Century, or PNAC, the neocon think tank suspected of masterminding the 9/11 attacks. In a document called Rebuilding America's Defenses, Strategy, Forces, and Resources for a New Century, published by the American Enterprises Project for a New American Century, a Systems Planning Corporation international executive, Dov Zakheim called for some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor, being necessary to foster the frame of mind needed for the American public to support a war in the Middle East that would politically and culturally reshape the region. A respected and established voice in the intelligence community, his views were eagerly accepted. And Dov went from his position at Systems Planning Corporation to become the comptroller of the Pentagon in May of 2001. Perhaps not so coincidentally, it was an SPC subsidiary, Tridata Corporation, that oversaw the investigation after the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center in 1993. SPC, according to their official website, specializes in many areas of defense technology production and manufacture, including a system developed by their radar physics group called the Flight Termination System, or FTS. This is a system used to destroy target drones, craft that would be fired on by test aircraft or weaponry, in the event of malfunctions or misses. This highly sophisticated wargame technology allows the control of several drones from a remote location on varying frequencies and has a range of several hundred miles. This technology can be used on many different types of aircraft, including large passenger jets. According to the SPC website, a recent customer at that time was Eglin Air Force Base, located in Florida. Eglin is very near another Air Force base in Florida, MacDill Air Force Base, where Dov Zakheim contracted to send at least 32 Boeing 767 aircraft as part of the Boeing Pentagon tanker lease agreement. As the events of September 11, 2001 occurred, little was mentioned about these strange coincidences and the proximity of Dov Zakheim and his group. Since there was little physical evidence remaining after the events, investigators were only left with photographic and anecdotal evidence. This is a photograph of the Flight Termination System module from their site. Note it has a cylindrical shape and is consistent with the size and shape of the object observed under the fuselage of Flight 175. The Boeing lease deal involved the replacement of the aging KC-135 tanker fleet with these smaller, more efficient Boeing 767s, which were to be leased by Dov Zakheim's group. The planes were to be refitted with refueling equipment, including lines and nozzle assemblies. In this enlargement of Flight 175, we can clearly see a cylindrical object under the fuselage and a structure that appears to be attached to the right underside of the rear fuselage section. When seen in comparison, it is obvious that the plane approaching the Trade Center has both these structures, the FTS module, and the mid-air refueling equipment, as configured on the modified Boeing 767 tankers. Of particular interest is the long tube-like anomalous structure under the rear fuselage area of 175. This structure runs along the right rear bottom of the plane. The equipment attached to the underside of the plane which hit the World Trade Center is identical in every single way to the Boeing 767s issued by Dov Zakheim.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Bring it back.
The video you're watching now came from Loose Change First Edition.
Did you catch that?
It appears to show the FTS pod self-destructing just before impact.
Also, notice that the flash is reflected in the fuselage of the plane. The flash is also present in footage taken by Evan Fairbanks, Jennifer Spell, and CNN. Al-Qaeda certainly couldn't have added this equipment at Logan International Airport. And even if they did, the flight crew would have noticed it. So where did this plane come from?
Another interesting piece of 9/11 evidence is the last 12 seconds of UA-175. Since every amateur videographer in New York City had their cameras pointed up at the burning Tower 1, the second plane strike was filmed from nearly every conceivable angle. Expert analysis of this plane leads to some startling revelations. First, there is the expertly controlled flight characteristics of this plane. During its last 12 seconds of flight, UA-175 made a single corrective maneuver so perfectly timed and executed that it's unlikely it was piloted by human hands.
One of the things that jumped out at me when I looked at the footage of the video of Flight 175 as it went into the World Trade Center is it appeared to me that there was something on the under fuselage of that aircraft that did not belong there, at least not with a commercial airliner. Now, I'll tell you where I have seen attachments that look like that on military aircraft. So the question you have to answer now is, was that the commercial airliner that hit the World Trade Center, or possibly was it an aircraft that looked very similar but was a military type airplane?
All the recorded sources, all the different photographic evidence that was produced by CNN and ABC, they all show this pod. It's there. You can see it with your own eyes. And in my professional opinion, that there was a pod attached to the bottom of that aircraft, and therefore it was not United Airlines Flight 175.
If you take a careful look at the flight paths of American Airlines 11 and UA-175, the two flights that took off from Boston's Logan Airport and crashed into the Twin Towers, you'll find a major clue. Not only did both these planes cross paths directly over Stewart Air Force Base, but they did so at the exact same time. Another odd synchronicity is Flight 93, which had been sitting on the tarmac delayed at the airport for nearly 40 minutes with no explanation. Originally scheduled to take off at 8:01 a.m., it was delayed until the moment that Flight AA-11 crashed into the North Tower at 8:43 a.m. Another interesting piece of evidence that ties Stewart Air Force Base to the center of this 9/11 conspiracy is the white mystery planes spotted over Washington and the Pentagon. Through careful investigation, we've been able to map out the flight paths of these two ominous aircraft, which have been identified as E-4Bs, a type of aircraft that the military uses as mobile command posts. What concerns me is that both of these aircraft took off from and landed at Stewart Air Force Base. Another interesting coincidence I found was that Flight 93 turned around directly over Hopkins Airport, and Flight 77 turned around directly over Tri-State Airport. Webster Tarpley has done some of the most thorough research into the wargame exercises that were taking place on the day of 9/11. But this white mystery plane, the Doomsday plane, what was it doing over the Pentagon and the White House on 9/11? Who was flying in that plane? What were they doing? Being the comptroller for the Pentagon and the chief financial officer, you have to kind of wonder what Dov Zakheim was doing on 9/11. And what his connections were to the $2.3 trillion that were missing from the Pentagon the day before 9/11. It's interesting, and I think it should be investigated. And finally, the most important anomaly in the body of evidence for planes used on 9/11 is the passenger list of Flight 77, and the names of some of these people aboard who had top-secret clearances and worked on Pentagon projects, possibly ones that were connected to the technologies that were used on 9/11. Thanks for watching. Please help us investigate these areas further.
All right, we have time for one last question. I'm going to go to this gentleman right here in the front.
First of all, thank you for providing this forum. It's an amazing forum, a great group of people you put together here today. My name is Scott Ricard. I'm a former NSA linguist and also a U.S. Air Force linguist. I've served my country for quite a long time, and I will tell you that the country needs a big reality check. Very disingenuous to say that Reagan was a peaceful president. He fought two wars that I covered very closely against Iran, and another war I covered very closely against the best way to fight your enemy is to use an enemy, and that's what we did with Saddam, and that's also what we did with guys like the folks in Afghanistan and in Pakistan against the Russians. We fought the Russians for 10 years as well. So that's very disingenuous. In fact, my question is, how can we continue to survive as a country? In my lifetime, I'm 50 years old this year. We've murdered over 25 million people in this world and lost less than 100,000 in battle. And 58,000 of those were in Vietnam. Now the fact is that we are a far more warring nation than any other nation on the history of this planet. We've killed more people, and we've done some terrible things around the world. And I really feel it's disingenuous to sit in front of a crowd and mislead them about the kind of nation that we've become. We've got more weapons of mass destruction. We provided mustard gas in the 80s to Saddam Hussein. The reason we didn't find weapons of mass destruction there is because they had stamp made in the USA on them, and we destroyed them. That's a fact.
Okay. Thank you. And you might want to wrap in any other comments you'd like to make as a wrap-up, as we'll go to each of you, and maybe we can start with Dov and go in reverse order that we started with. Sure.
Well, you know, everybody's entitled to their opinion. You may have been in the middle of our shipping mustard gas to Saddam. You may have been in the middle of our killing 25 million people. That's not the country I know. It's as simple as that. And it's not the country I've served. I would say this. It's true, we supplied the Afghan rebels. No doubt about it. But they were doing the fighting. And if we helped Saddam against the Iranians, he was doing the fighting. So I stand by what I said. We sent troops into Grenada. It wasn't exactly a 10-year-old battle. We actually pulled ourselves out of Lebanon. So I stand by what I said about Mr. Reagan. I don't believe that we are the evil empire. Maybe you do. And I really do believe that our country, whoever is president, has its heart in the right place. And I'll give you the proof of the pudding. whether Mr. Obama is president, Mr. Romney is president, whoever's president, I don't see people migrating out of this country. They all want to come here. If we were so terrible, they would be going to Russia and China and God knows where else. But since the 18th century, your ancestors, my ancestors, his ancestors, everybody here's ancestors have all been coming here. We're a good country, not a bad one.
Rich.
Morning. Being down here now, as different as it looks, I still have those visuals, those images in my mind, in my head.
We're on, as a nation, officially now.
The suicide bombers, it happens in Israel on a daily basis. Those are the things we have to be careful of now, we have to watch for now.
Do you expect suicide bombers? Plane struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center 1 year ago. Hundreds of people have gathered here at Ground Zero to mark the anniversary in what is expected to be, we tell you that the anniversary ceremony will also include several moments of silence, marking the times that the hijacked jets place roses on the site.
Armed guards on the gate, Parliament's open for business. Security's never been so high at Westminster, and every MP queuing at the barriers knew why. Tony Blair's deputy was looking even grimmer than usual. This debate's a prelude to a new kind of war, and in the Commons, the Prime Minister had no doubt it was justified by what happened on September the 11th. He delivered his verdict of guilt.
For myself and all other government ministers who have studied the full information, we have absolutely no doubt that bin Laden and his network were responsible for the attacks on the 11th of September.
The Prime Minister said he was handing MPs a file of evidence, sensitive intelligence left out, but enough to show that Osama bin Laden's network was the right target, and with it the Taliban, unless even now they handed over the terrorists. Meanwhile, food and aid was on its way.
The Afghan people are not our enemy, for they have our sympathy and they will have our support. Our enemy is Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda network, who were responsible for the events of the 11th of September. The Taliban regime must yield them up or become our enemy also.
So the military and humanitarian effort were both ready. The war aims clear. The Allies were already in contact with Afghans who might eventually be placed to take over power. The response would be measured, driven by necessity and reason.
We will not act for revenge. We will act because we need to, for the protection of our people and our way of life, including confidence in our economy. The threat posed by bin Laden and his terrorism must be eliminated. We act for justice. We act with world opinion behind us. And we have an absolute determination to see justice done and this evil of mass international terrorism confronted and defeated.
Now, you probably noticed I don't feel about that war the way we were told we were supposed to feel about that war, the way we were ordered and instructed by the United States government to feel about that war. You see, I'll tell you, my mind doesn't work that way. I got this real moron thing I do. It's called thinking. And I'm not a very good American because I like to form my own opinions. I don't just roll over when I'm told to. Sad to say, most Americans just roll over on command. Not me. I have certain rules I live by. My first rule, I don't believe anything the government tells me. Nothing. Zero. Nope.
There is no question whatsoever that Saddam is seeking and is working and is advancing towards the development of nuclear weapons. No question whatsoever. And there is no question that once he acquires it, history shifts immediately. The dangers posed by a nuclear-armed Saddam were understood by my country 2 decades ago, well before September 11th. In 1981, the late Prime Minister of Israel, Menachem Begin, dispatched the Israeli Air Force on a pre-dawn raid that destroyed the Iraqi nuclear reactor at Osirak. This probably took place months away from Saddam's ability to assemble the critical mass of plutonium for the first atomic bomb.
In America, someone is keeping a record of every call you make, who you call and who calls you, when you talked, and for how long. These records go back for years, and they can obtain this information on you or anyone else, and you'll never know. Someone is watching. That someone is the United States government. But how did this happen in a country where the Constitution protects people's right to be secure against unreasonable searches? And even more importantly, what can you do about it? This is the United States Congress just hours after the 9/11 attacks. Like everyone else in the country, they're in shock and they don't know what will happen next. They only know one thing: they need to do something, fast. The next month, Congress receives the Patriot Act, a 342-page document. The Attorney General, John Ashcroft, tells Congress they should pass this anti-terrorism bill in a week.
Virtually no one in this chamber have any idea what's in that bill. Why should we care? Well, it's only the Constitution. It's only individual liberty at stake.
The Patriot Act is signed into law just 3 days after it was introduced. Worse, buried deep inside the Patriot Act were provisions that sounded harmless, but were anything but, like Section 215. Its supporters claimed it would help the FBI find the bad guys. But over a decade later, the NSA and the FBI are misusing Section 215 to sweep up the information of ordinary U.S. citizens. Section 215 lets the government collect tangible things relevant to but the government now claims the records of every phone call you make, now and in the future, are a relevant, tangible thing. So Section 215 isn't just for suspected terrorists. The Bush administration claimed, and Obama agreed, that it could be used to get the call records of everyone in the U.S. Most members of Congress didn't know the law was being misused, and the program is overseen by a secret court where everything's classified. And it was this secret court, not Congress and not us, that decided your phone records are now up for grabs.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign.
On Tuesday night, I gave the order for British forces to take part in military action in Iraq. Tonight, British servicemen and women are engaged from air, land and sea. Their mission? To remove Saddam Hussein from power and disarm Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction. I know this course of action has produced deep divisions of opinion in our country.
Were aimed at Baghdad during the night. The last arrived here as an air raid siren was going off just before dawn. John Irvine, ITV News, Baghdad.
On the 13th of April 2003, when I went back to the museum, it was something like as if a hurricane had hit. Completely everything was destroyed. All the documents were on the floor. All the equipments were stolen. And what about the museum itself? It had really a catastrophe. Because the looters were inside the galleries, the looters were in the storerooms. And for me, that was the first time in my life to see a museum been looted in that way. It had been ransacked completely. What they could not take, they smashed. During the fall of Baghdad, and what we saw of these horrible scenes of the looting all over the city. And what happened to the museum, this was not the only thing. The main problem was the archaeological sites, the chaos that was there, the insecurity that was there. It was a kind of looting all over the country, but looting the archaeological sites, that was the most dangerous thing. Destroying all the texture of these archaeological sites by just digging in a crazy way and then extracting all these antiquities, thousands of antiquities. We have brought to the museum around 17,000 objects. If we have these 17,000 objects in the museum, how much has been taken outside? The markets are full of clay tablets from only one site, Ummah. Thousands of clay tablets are in Europe, in America, or even in Japan. But what are we doing for that? We have to work together with that. It's not something that they are losing and tomorrow with the prices of oil they can buy it again. It's something that has been lost and can never be bought again. It's something that will be lost and we can never have it. It's gone for good. It is actually the memory of the Iraqi people. These are the memories of the mankind that are there, and they are lost. Let's gather together and see what we can do so that people will not forget what happened. And maybe we can have this a kind of every year event so that we will not forget. Let's gather together here in Stony Brook. We'll gather together with a lot of students and faculty to remember those 3 days. And if you can gather together and remember and light a candle. Light a candle is a very nice symbol so that we will not forget.
The reasons for NATO's intervention in Libya. And as RT's Laura Emmett reports, the organisation may have been trying to prevent Gaddafi from burying the American buck.
According to some, it's about protecting civilians.
We must not tolerate this regime using military force against its own people.
Others say it's about oil.
The only reason they're interested with Libya is about the oil. You'd think we'd be in Iraq if the major export there was broccoli.
But some are convinced intervention in Libya is all about currency, specifically Gaddafi's plan to introduce the gold dinar, a single African currency made from gold, a true sharing of the wealth.
It's one of these things that you have to plan almost in secret, because as soon as you say you're going to change over from the dollar to something else, you're going to be targeted. There were 2 conferences on this, one in 96 and another one in the year 2000, called the World Mataba Conference, organized by Gaddafi. And everybody was interested, and I think most countries in Africa were keen.
Gaddafi didn't give up. In the months leading up to the military intervention, he called on African and Muslim nations to join together to create this new currency that would rival the dollar and euro. They would sell oil and other resources around the world only for gold dinars. It's an idea that would shift the economic balance of the world. Countries' wealth would depend on how much gold they have, not how many dollars they trade. And Libya has 144 tons of gold. The UK has double that, but 10 times the population.
If Gaddafi had an intent to try to reprice his oil or whatever else the country was selling in the global markets and accept something else as a currency, or maybe launch a gold dinar currency, any move such as that would certainly not be welcomed by the power elite today who are responsible for controlling the world's central banks. So yes, that would certainly be something that would cause his immediate dismissal and the need for other reasons to be brought forth for removing him from power.
It's happened before. In 2000, Saddam Hussein announced Iraqi oil would be traded in euros, not dollars. Sanctions and an invasion followed. Some say because the Americans were desperate to prevent OPEC from transferring oil trading in all its member countries to the euro.
The UK's gold is kept here in a secure vault somewhere in the depths of the Bank of England. As in most developed countries, there's not enough to go around. But that's not the case in places like Libya and many of the Gulf states. A gold dinar would have given oil-rich African and Middle Eastern countries the power to turn around to their energy-hungry customers and say, sorry, the price has gone up and we want gold. Some say the US and its NATO allies literally couldn't afford to let that happen. Laura Emmett, RT, London.
We came, we saw, he died. Did it have anything to do with your visit? No, I'm sure it did.
Kenneth O'Keefe served as a U.S. Marine, but after being discharged, he was left with only a feeling of disappointment. He burned his U.S. passport and dedicated himself to a different cause. His rich activist biography includes being a human shield in Iraq, sailing on a Gaza flotilla, protecting marine life in Hawaii, and helping establish dialogue with Iran. And he is our guest today.
As a Marine, Kenneth O'Keefe fought against Iraq. It shattered his view of the world. Ever since, he has been fighting a war against war, facing American bombs as a human shield or running the Gaza blockade. He is never afraid to speak truth to power. But what makes him take up action for others?
So I'm here with activist Kenneth O'Keefe. It's really great to have you on our show. Kenneth, I know that you've led a human shield action in Iraq right before the war started, and then you were deported. Why do you think the removal of Saddam hasn't improved the lives of Iraqis? Or has it? I don't know.
Well, I think if you really want to know the truth about the invasion of Iraq, there's clearly some incentives for the invasion. Oil, securing oil was one of them. Establishing permanent military bases in the region was another one. But a far less talked about reality is Israeli plans, which made clear that the Balkanization of surrounding countries, in particular Iraq, if we go to Oded Yanan's plan for Israel in the 1980s, it lays out very clearly a strategy of destabilizing all of the surrounding areas of Israel. This includes Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and even Egypt and Saudi Arabia. And this long-term goal is part of the Greater Israel Project. So in terms of the sectarian divide you see happening in Iraq today, it's actually all part of a very well-designed plan to try and secure the goal, this fantasy goal of the Greater Israel Project.
By fundamentalist powers, or there's just more sectarian violence that grows.
Yes, and it would seem on the surface from a sane point of view that everything is going wrong. But in fact, when you fracture a country along sectarian divide, ultimately you weaken the country. What the last thing that Israel or the United States wants is a strong Nasser-type leader, an Arab nationalist who will seriously ensure that the resources of that country are taken and protected and used for the benefit of the people. That's the last thing that the empire wants and that Israel wants. So while you have these religious fundamentalist nutcases who are running around bombing and doing all sorts of stuff like that, you have a weakened, fractured country in Iraq, and that is the prerequisite for ultimately expanding Israel into the fantasy of the Greater Israel Project. It doesn't seem sane, and it's not sane, because those who are trying to carry out these agendas are pure and simple psychopaths.
And so you think that American administrations, one after another, have been following this plan for 30 years?
If you ask me how the world functions, then you have to understand one thing plain and simple. The head of the snake, the system of power, is headed by the financial system. The bankers rule the earth through the private control of the issuance of money, debt-based money, which we're all supposed to pay, ultimately with all of these things that they call austerity and whatnot. The bankers basically, through the control of the issuance of money, which allows them to provide themselves with an infinite supply of money, means they can buy anything and anyone that can be bought. So when we look at the vast majority of governments around the world, they're nothing more than puppets who are carrying out an agenda for the bankers. And the bankers at the top of this pyramid are, as I've said, plain and simple psychopaths. They're drunk on their own power. They're used to getting everything they want. They can buy anything and anyone that can be bought. And this explains the corruption of virtually every government we can look at. And the policies do not reflect the interests of the people. They reflect pure and simple the interests of the bankers.
When they wanted to invade Iraq, the excuse was weapons of mass destruction. Turns out those weapons didn't exist. Oops. When they wanted to topple Libya, they told you Gaddafi was murdering civilians. Turns out these civilians were CIA-backed jihadists. Minor detail. They've wanted regime change in Syria for years, so they armed, trained, and funded an insurgency. Most of the weapons ended up in the hands of extremists, who used them in rather unpleasant ways. This made for bad PR. Then, the West claimed Assad used chemical weapons against his own people. They said they had proof before there was even time for an investigation. That proof, unfortunately, was classified. So, of course, we can't see it.
A lot of this stuff is classified at this point, so those things we're going to hold pretty close to the vest.
Netanyahu and top Israeli officials have said that Israel continues preparing for possible repercussions on Syria's chemical weapons, which they said remain secure, despite the fact that President Bashar al-Assad has lost control of parts of his country. Major General Amos Gilad, Director of Policy and Political Military Affairs at the Defense Ministry, told Army Radio that the civil war between Assad and the rebels had become deadlocked, but that the Syrian leader showed no signs of heeding international calls to step down. As Syria's southern neighbor, Israel has been concerned about chemical weapons falling into the hands of Islamist militants or Lebanese Hezbollah fighters, warning it could intervene to stop such developments.
The West would have you believe that Assad lost his marbles. In spite of the fact that Syrian forces were easily wiping up the last militants using conventional weaponry, and Russia still had their back, Assad apparently got an uncontrollable urge to use poison gas on civilians, a move guaranteed to trigger a military response. Why would Assad do something so stupid? Because he's a vicious animal who enjoys murdering his own people. Right.
We can speak now to the Labour peer and former head of the Royal Navy, Lord West. He joins us from our Westminster studios, and thank you very much for your time this morning. You've been casting some doubt on what's been happening, the evidence, according to our own Defence Secretary, according to President Macron of France and others, about what happened in Douma, saying that the evidence doesn't really fit well for President Assad ordering a chemical attack. Just tell us more about your thoughts on that, first of all.
Yes, President Assad is in the process of winning this civil war, and he was about to take over and occupy Douma, all that area. He'd had a long, hard slog, slowly capturing that whole area of the city. And there, just before he goes in and takes it all over, apparently he decides to have a chemical attack. It just doesn't ring true. It seems extraordinary because clearly he would know that there's likely to be a response from the Allies. What benefit is there for his military? Most of the rebel fighters, this disparate group of Islamists had withdrawn. There were a few women and children left around. What benefit was there militarily in doing what he did? I find that extraordinary. Whereas we know that in the past some of the Islamic groups have used chemicals, and of course there would be huge benefit in them labelling an attack as coming from Assad, because they would guess quite rightly that there'd be a response from the US, as there was last time, and possibly from the UK and France.
But I find it very unbelievable that at this point, where Bashar al-Assad has won in Syria, that he would jeopardize that victory by using chemical weapons and thus drawing the United States into the fray.
The debate that seems to be missing from this is, and this was actually mentioned by the ambassador, was what possible motive might have triggered Syria to launch a chemical attack at this time in this place. The Syrians are winning. Don't take my word for it. Take the American military's word for it. General Virgil, the head of CENTCOM, he said to Congress the other day, Assad has won this war, and we need to face that. So, and then you got last week the statement by Trump, or the tweet by Trump, that America had finished with ISIL and we were going to pull out soon, very soon. And then suddenly you get...
Okay, I'm very sorry. You've been very patient waiting for us, but we do need to leave it there. I'm very sorry.
The West lied about Iraq. They lied about Libya. They are lying about Syria. And this is just the beginning. They'll keep using the same formula as long as you keep falling for it.
So I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the joint staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, we're going to war with Iraq. Why? He said, I don't know. He said, I guess they don't know what else to do. So I said, well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda? He said, no. He says, there's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq. He said, I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments. And he said, I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail. So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
Regardless of how it ended up playing, I think, in the Beltway, what is true is Assad got rid of his chemical weapons.
It was his decision to decide to bomb that helped to bring people together so we could cut the deal that got 100% of the declared chemical weapons out of Syria.
The United States attacked Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Yemen. Why are U.S. operatives helping to destabilize Syria? And why is the United States government so intent on taking down Iran, in spite of the fact that Iran has not attacked any country since 1798? And what's next? What are we headed for? When you look at the current trajectory that we're on, it doesn't make any sense at all if you evaluate it based on what we're taught in school. And it doesn't make any sense if you base your worldview on the propaganda that the mainstream media tries to pass off as news. But it makes perfect sense once you know the real motives of the powers that be. In order to understand those motives, we first have to take a look at history. In 1945, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world reserve currency, which meant that international commodities were priced in dollars. The agreement, which gave the United States a distinct financial advantage, was made under the condition that those dollars would remain redeemable for gold at a consistent rate of $35 per ounce. The United States promised not to print very much money, but this was on the honor system, because the Federal Reserve refused to allow any audits or supervision of its printing presses. In the years leading up to 1970, expenditures in the Vietnam War made it clear to many countries that the U.S. was printing far more money than it had in gold. And in response, they began to ask for their gold back. This, of course, set off a rapid decline in the value of the dollar. The situation climaxed in 1971 when France attempted to withdraw its gold and Nixon refused. On August 15th, he made the following announcement.
I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
This was obviously not a temporary suspension, as he claimed, but rather a permanent default. And for the rest of the world who had entrusted the United States with their gold, it was outright theft. In 1973, President Nixon asked King Faisal of Saudi Arabia to accept only U.S. dollars as payment for oil and to invest any excess profits in U.S. Treasury bonds, notes, and bills. In return, Nixon offered military protection for Saudi oil fields. The same offer was extended to each of the world's key oil-producing countries, and by 1975, every member of OPEC had agreed to only sell their oil in U.S. dollars. The act of moving the dollar off of gold and tying it to foreign oil instantly forced every oil-importing country in the world to start maintaining a constant supply of Federal Reserve paper. And in order to get that paper, they would have to send real physical goods to America. This was the birth of the petrodollar. Paper went out, everything America needed came in, and the United States got very, very rich as a result. It was the largest financial con in recorded history. The arms race of the Cold War was a game of poker. Military expenditures were the chips, and the U.S. had an endless supply of chips. With the petrodollar under its belt, it was able to raise the stakes higher and higher, outspending every other country on the planet, until eventually U.S. military expenditures surpassed that of all other nations in the world combined. The Soviet Union never had a chance. The collapse of the communist bloc in 1991 removed the last counterbalance to American military might. The United States was now an undisputed superpower with no rival. Many hoped that this would mark the beginning of a new era of peace and stability. Unfortunately, there were those in high places who had other ideas.
U.S. mission from the beginning has been to destroy the Assad legitimate government, as Russia keeps pointing out quite correctly, and to simply militarize through NATO not only Syria, but the entire Middle East, including Iraq, which was unfinished business from the Iraq War of a few years ago, and from there to move on for its militarization campaign, potentially, I think, to Saudi Arabia, perhaps through Turkey.
Yeah, and as everyone that's been observing this militarization campaign knows, some very unethical non-state actors have been used by some governments. I mean, we see accusations of U.S., Turkey, even Israel working either side by side or in strategic complicity with ISIL and some of the other terrorist groups. And I know that your new book, The Lost Hegemon, Whom the Gods Would Destroy, speaks about this a bit more in depth. So can you tell our listeners more about how this works and what countries are involved and how?
Well, the money source for most of the creation of ISIL or ISIS in Syria and Iraq and throughout everywhere comes from the money bags of Saudi Arabia. Saudi financing, the same financing conduit that created the CIA's Mujahideen with Osama bin Laden back in the 1980s, if you recall. And they're playing a very, very dirty role in this ISIS, I think with the aim that if they establish a caliphate, that ISIS will simply be the long arm of the Saudi monarchy, and they will control the oil. They ultimately will control the oil, maybe in some arrangement with Erdogan, who's bought and paid for proxy of Saudi money. His presidential election in 2014, he reportedly got $10 billion from the Saudis to get him in office. So this is a very, very dirty game. It's a game where every player in the Middle East is deceiving and lying, from the French, from the British, from the Americans, from the Saudis, from the Turks, Erdogan, and so forth. So it's at this point, a complete quagmire which runs the risk of escalating into a third world war. You have Russian Air Force flying. 6 weeks ago, they were doing a masterful job at isolating and destroying munition dumps and oil supply lines of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And now they're being joined by NATO planes from France, NATO planes from Britain, NATO planes that were there previously from the U.S., and it's suddenly getting very crowded in the Syrian airspace. So the slightest Tonkin Bay kind of incident staged by U.S. intelligence or whatever could rapidly escalate the situation. It's extremely dangerous.
Regjeringspartiet Likud, han her for å holde en tale for bosetterne som samlet her.
אז היועץ שלי אייר לי קריקטורה
Karikaturen kommunikasjonsministeren viser frem viser Benjamin Netanyahu som planter et israelsk flagg på Gazastripen med velsignelse fra USAs president Donald Trump som gir ham nøkkelen til Gaza.
ואויב כזה מבין ויכאב לו כאשר הוא יראה שנלקחים ממנו אדמות. כאשר האדמות האלו יחזרו לבעליהן המקוריים, האמיתיים, שזה עם ישראל, כוח ההרתעה של מדינת ישראל, של עם ישראל צריך לחזור. צריכים לפחד. מי שמפיל שערה משערות ראשו של יהודי, צריך לחטוף מנה אחת אפיים.
Offisielt sier Benjamin Netanyahu at krigen på Gazastripen handler om å knuse Hamas. Men her innrømmer altså en av hans ministre at målet med krigen er å ta over palestinsk land med Toraen og Bibelen i hånda. Men bosetterne, som dypt religiøse, nøyer seg ikke med Gaza og Vestbredden. De og ministerne som støtter dem i Netanyahus regjering, drømmer om et stor Israel som Gud har lovet dem.